So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Manuel Garcia, global leader of Ipsos's neuroscience practice. Manuel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Welcome to today's webinar. So my name is Manuel Garcia. As Ellen said, I'm a global lead of neuroscience at Ipsos. I come from academic tradition. I got my PhD very, very long ago. And ever since, I've been working in the industry, in the application for a long time. In the meantime, I used to teach consumer neuroscience, which is a kind of new field, not that new anymore, right? At the business school at New York University. And I developed with a colleague a textbook in the field of consumer neuroscience. So if you are like very, very interested in learning about it, here's published by MIT Press, and you can access it. But yeah, I'm global lead of neuroscience at Ipsos, which is a fascinating role because I work within a group that's a global science organization that work across all business of Ipsos and in partnership with academics, with professors, with academic researchers, developing frameworks that are solid, from which we can develop services that are useful to all of you. So one of these projects that's been actually going on for a few years now is the project that's bringing us together today that I like to call Redefining Emotion. So I'm going to dig into that, and I'm really excited to talk about this because it's one passion of mine, and I guess it's a passion of a lot of people because that brings a lot of attention. But why now? Why are we talking about emotion now? It's not like it's a new thing. It's not like we haven't been interested in that forever, but there's been increased interest in the industry on measuring emotion and understanding its effect and its impact on behavior and on attitudes of consumers and citizens, especially in areas like advertising research, like customer experience, like brand equity, and also with social media analytics. But that's not the only reason. We know that in the past decades, and particularly in my field, in consumer neuroscience, you and we have been exploring different outlets to capture consumers' emotion at different levels of depth. Like we've gone to the electrical brain activity, we've gone to like different proxies of emotion on the skin, on the heart rate, and there's a lot of things that we are also working on. But together with that, in the field of emotion, academically, there are older postulates that have been put into question. Some of those that understood emotions as universal, like the way some people understand emotion should be applied to everyone, and that has been put into question in relation to cross-cultural validity. So also, I think things have accelerated around this topic in the past few years because of the disruption that was caused to all of our lives in the past couple of years with the pandemic, but also obviously to human lab research that forced all of us to shift gears towards scalable approaches and put all of our effort in creating something that's effective, that increases value, that is fast, that's scalable, and of course that's very data driven. So with a compound of all these factors, we were already working on redefining the concept of emotion for the industry according to existing new theories, and we've been moved into a lot of very interesting foundational research that's now translating into services that are of use to you. So this is what I'm gonna be covering today. First, we'll talk about like this framework to redefine emotion, and then I'll talk about a lot of like the original research that we have been conducted at a foundational level. First, to like design a survey that's most optimal, but also how that works across countries, because the cross-cultural aspect of this is key and critical to the emotional framework and to the whole school of thought of constructivism. And then we'll move into implications. I'll explain what's the roadmap of offer development, approach development that we've been following, and where we're at, and where you could potentially partner with us. So let's start with redefining emotion. What is emotion? So at the beginning of this journey, something that I did is to go and try to identify what's a definition of emotion. And I went to like different respected dictionaries. I went to the Oxford English Dictionary, to the Merriam-Webster, and to the Cambridge. And just like the three of them, they were showing pretty different definitions. One says the natural instinctive state of mind, blah, blah, blah. Merriam-Webster was talking about a conscious mental reaction subjected to things, and Cambridge was talking about strong feeling. So we have instinctive state, conscious mental reaction, strong feeling. So those are like very different things, especially like instinctive to conscious mental reaction. Those are very different concepts. So clearly, even if we think we're talking about the same when we say emotion, we are clearly not. So we had to start by defining. So that's a very well accepted definition of emotion by Davidson and Scherer and other academic people who study emotion that says that it's well, you have it on the screen, but basically a change in your brain, a change in your body in response to something, to facilitate a response to a stimulus, just being external or internal, right? So an increase in your heart rate, that could be an increase in your sweat level, an increase in your a change in your physiology. So that would be an emotion. However, and this is where things get very interesting. Your emotions are not just defined by a physiological experience, right? But also by the meaning we attribute to them. So my heart rate increases, and then given the context and also given my language and my culture, I understand that this means fear, or I understand that this means anger, or I understand that I'm in love. So the same physiological change, the same emotion at the core level can be different emotional experiences or emotional constructs. And that makes that what makes things more complex. And it seems like then things become very complex, because even emotions like fear and anger that were thought to be universal, they are not that universal. Like even when we translate it, there are nuances from one language to another that makes it actually very different from what we in English say mean when we say fear to what someone else would mean when they say fear in a different language, in a different culture. Even some of you might be aware of words that are really hard to translate. I'm sharing some of those here from Australian Aboriginal language, but also from Finnish, from Sanskrit, from Dutch, from German, like Schadenfreude, gezellig in Dutch. So those of you that are bilingual or multilingual are probably aware of different words that you don't know how to translate. So that feeling actually happens with most of the words that refer to emotion. However, here's the good news. There's a study that came out in 2019 that showed that even if all of these emotions in different languages are different, they all can be mapped onto dimensions. And the main dimensions, they differed by family of languages, but the main ones overall were valence, which is whether the emotion is positive or negative, arousal, which is whether the emotion is intense or it's rather weak, and control or dominance, which is whether the emotion makes you feel in control or rather out of control. So that's the good news, because then if we can take all of these emotional words in different languages and we can map them into these three-dimensional space, we can work with that, we can compare. And also we can attach numbers to that, rating scores on valence, arousal, and control that can be used to predict behavior, to predict attitudes. And that could be applied to multiple things. That could be of great value for multiple things. So that sparked the idea of, look at this, with this simplicity and all the value that it can provide and all the novelty that it can provide, when it's something that's also being studied for decades, like studying valence, arousal, and control has been done for decades, but not with this nuance of knowing that emotions are not universal, and this can now help us understand also cultural differences. So this framework is also, in more technical terms, collected in the handout that you can download here. There's also a lighter read explaining this framework that will be coming out probably in the following few weeks. And yeah, in the future, obviously, or if now you have any question, add it there and I answer at the end, or if you have any question around the framework in the future, more than happy to look into that. So based on this, let's remember that emotion is a change in our body. The meaning that we attribute to an emotion is very important, which is the emotional construct, but it's very dependent on culture and context. But it can be rated, this experience can be mapped, can be rated into valence, arousal, and control. So based on this is the roadmap that we established. First, to develop a consistent approach to measuring emotion, and then with that, develop a database, a cross-cultural database of emotional constructs that are mapped to valence, arousal, or control. And with that, since they have ratings, we can build predictive models for attitudes and behaviors. The VAC model has been historically proven to be strong at predicting attitudes and behavior in different aspects of life and different aspects of research. So we moved forward to following this roadmap. So the first one was this, to develop a science-based approach to measuring emotion that can be consistent across culture, that can be consistent across application, and that allows for global comparison and the development of predictive models. So in order to do that, we conducted research to start by identifying the best design. In this case, in this foundational research, we used images. So we have an internal database of pictures, which is called the Ipsos database of emotional pictures, that is generated to elicit emotional response throughout this whole space. So it was developed so it would be helpful for validations and for this kind of foundational research. And all those images have been evaluated through a multi-channel approach, collecting also EEG data, galvanic skin response data, heart rate, eye tracking, facial affective response, all of that. So all of this can be traced back to the physiological response. So we evaluated different survey designs in which participants were rating some of these images, and we were looking for the design that had the highest consistency of ratings in valence, arousal, control, low dropout rate, reasonable length of interview, something that's most optimal. And this is what we ended up with. Basically, it's pretty simple. So they're exposed to, in this case, it was the picture, but in different applications, it could be after an experience that you have somewhere as a customer. It can be when you're evaluating a new innovation, a new product, a concept, or an ad, programming, so you name it, because the simplicity of this is beautiful. The scientific rigor behind it is also beautiful. And and it makes it very, very valuable and very applicable, and also very easy to implement, very scalable and very fast. So when we started conducting this research then across cultures, when we had identified the right survey design, we conducted some research across different countries, also leveraging this internal database of pictures. And we use this across the United States, Mexico, Brazil, France, Saudi Arabia, and China. And this also worked to start building a cross-cultural database of emotional words that would be mapped. So we could compare, we could build, and eventually we can predict. So here you're seeing the ratings for prevalence and arousal, just for, I'm not showing control here, just because it's more simple to show 2 dimensions. And we see like a similar distribution of the ratings in valence arousal for United States, China, and Saudi Arabia for similar pictures. It's sort of occupying the space, which is what we need and what it was intended to be. So that's good. But then we also identified in some other markets, when we started collecting data, that that some of these dimensions were oddly correlated, which they are not supposed to be, obviously, because if they are correlated, they are not adding value, right? So for instance, like we're seeing here in one of the examples in Brazil, that there was a very strong correlation of valence and arousal, which means that when we were asking excited, the way we were asking excited in Portuguese, it was biased towards negative. So they were only excited when they were experiencing something negative, and that's completely wrong. So what we did with several languages is to evaluate different options on how to ask mostly arousal, because that was the most complicated one. And in many of them, we found these different patterns. So you can see just with your eyes that option 1 is sort of covering the space. Option 2 is a correlation on which is negatively biased. And option 3 is a V shape, right? So and we saw a similar patterns with different options in Spanish, Portuguese, and French. And that's very important because we need to use the words that allow us to collect the data correctly. We need this scientific rigor, obviously, in our research. So on top, clearly option 1 is the one that looks better, and that's the one that was used for this research moving forward. But we also compared the difference between each one of the options to the average of the global, and clearly it's option 1 that was closer to the global average, and that's the one that shall be used in Portuguese in the future, at least in Brazil. This might have gotten a little technical, but I think this is just to show that wording can heavily impact data. So it's very important to have this rigor in your research, rigor that we obviously follow at Ipsos, and it's important to test to avoid wording-driven bias. And we're doing that every time we apply this into a new market to ensure that when they're rating their emotional experience, they're rating the way we are expecting them to rate it. It's important to test for correlation among these metrics. So also to avoid unnecessary questions, because if they are like strongly correlated, you're adding questions that are not adding value. And also, as we did with all of this research, to leverage ground truth data to measure validity, what it is, to make sure that you're measuring what you are intending to measure. So these are things that we are very strong at Ipsos. So once we get over these little research box, we could proceed confidently with the research across the 6 markets. We did see that valence arousal control, VAC rating, differed for country, and also for country interacting with picture for all 3 dimensions. We showed, as expected, an impact of culture and language on the experienced emotion for each dimension, but with certain consistency, most consistency within valence. Now, and this is like the most fun part. We want to build a database of emotional constructs, and this is something that's really adding a whole lot of value in all the pilots we're creating. So what we're doing in all the trials during this foundational research, and also the pilots that I will mention later, pilots for advertising research, pilots for customer experience, and why this could be applied to social media analytics and also to other types of text analytics, is that on each trial, we first ask them to give us, to express, to show, to write one emotion, 1 or 2 words of describing the emotion they feel, and then they rate the experience in valence, arousal, and control. In that way, we're getting, we're building the database just automatically, basically, and these words are already rated on valence, arousal, and control. So we can build in different markets and different languages something like this, on which these emotional words, these emotional constructs are already mapped into the VAC space. Yeah, these are actual data in English. Then we're working also on identifying on which context they can be used together, or in which context these emotional words differ also significantly in the ratings. So we start doing that across the 6 markets, right? And here you have on the screen your data in English, in Chinese, in Arabic, in French, in Spanish, and in Portuguese. And now here you have the same words. They are all translated to English. These are not all the words that were mentioned during the research, but the ones that had highest frequency. And then it's interesting to look at how the words that are translated as being the same, some of them are more consistent. They tend to be more consistent in languages that are more similar, and then less consistent in languages that are less similar. So here we're looking at different words and the variability across markets for valence, arousal, and control. We can see that while valence seems to be most consistent, as we could previously see, control and arousal show more variability. So this is very interesting, because that means that when we've been using emotions that we predetermine and that we translate, we are actually capturing very different emotional experiences and putting them in the same bucket, under the same label. So we're missing in our insights a lot of those nuances. So I'm going to give you an example that's very clear to see. So here we're comparing, see, KSA is Saudi Arabia, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the United States. So we have like different emotional words, different emotional labels. And the difference between one country and the other in valence and arousal. So, for instance, something that that caught our attention, that's something as basic as happy, an emotion that was always thought to be universal. That when you say happy, feliz, Zaid, however you say it in different languages, we're saying the same. And then we find, look at this. We find that when we're comparing happy and Zaid, happy in Arabic, while valence is exactly at the same level, there's no difference between valence of happy and happy in Arabic. Arousal has a difference of like 25 points. So it's pretty widely different, what we're translating and using as the same. So if we look at this on this graph, here you have happy in English, and here you have, then you have happy in Arabic. And interestingly, like I should have marked here, but here at the bottom you have France, Mexico, and Brazil that are like more similar languages, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. and there's some variance, but it's rather closer. So that's something that I found very interesting, and that shows that this approach is capable of capturing those nuances that we were not able to capture before. So this part is very unique. Then we also see that we can identify cultural variation. So to one stimulus, in this case, we're using images, but as I said, it can be your customer experience, your brand, positioning, your brand communication. It can be perceived in different places because of the culture. So one example that we're using here is this picture of a graveyard. So you can see that ratings in valence, which is generally the most consistent, is significantly different in markets like France, Saudi Arabia, China, and the United States. And even when we look at the words they use as the emotion they experience, seeing the picture of a graveyard, we see very clear differences across the three markets. We see that in China it's like low arousal, but very negative, like low negative valence. And all the ratings are concentrated here. Differently in France, it's kind of like all over the place, from like high arousal and negative to low arousal and positive. So from things like grief and pain to things like calm and peace. And in the United States, we found it went all over the place in low arousal. So it would be from cold and death, but in a much more calm way than for the French respondents, to, again, quiet and peaceful. So it's interesting to see that it can, one, capture those nuances of the words of the same word, but in different markets, and then also being very sensitive to cultural differences. So that's something that got us excited, and it provides a big opportunity to explore cultural transferability of the emotional experience of your brand positioning, your brand communication, your customer experience to other markets, in case you are a global organization. So to wrap it up, there are a couple of things that I want to mention, some implications to sum it up, but then also some things, some pilots that are going on right now that are very interesting and are very exciting. So first, to remind you that emotional constructs, these emotional words, are not universal, but however, they can be mapped on emotional dimensions like our valence, arousal, and control. And they can be integrated within the measurement of the emotional experience to address your research questions and to address empirical questions. We saw that VAC ratings by valence, arousal, control are consistent but differ across countries, which shows the impact of culture and language of the experienced emotion for each one of these emotions. We've seen in our R&D that the words you use on your questions matter, and it's important to test to avoid word-driven bias. That's something that we do because we take scientific rigor very seriously here at Ipsos, and the Global Science Organization is here to be live proof of that. We saw that VAC ratings show interesting similarities and differences across cultures when we database those emotional words and we map them onto the VAC ratings, the valence, arousal, control. We see that there's a possibility to explore cultural transferability of emotional measurement and construct across markets. And now we are working on leveraging this VAC and this mapped emotional construct for predictive modeling, because you will remember that on our roadmap, we first wanted to develop a consistent approach to measure emotion. We've done that with our survey design research, developed a cross-cultural database of emotional constructs. We have started to do that. That basically never ends because, as you might know, Ipsos is present in 90 countries, in 90 markets. So we have a lot of work and a lot of languages to cover there. But then the third one was to build predictive models for attitudes and behaviors using those cores. So that's really cool because we have it in the past few months and we have to continue doing. We have conducted several pilots to integrate the system into different aspects of research. As I mentioned, advertising research, social listening, customer experience, and we have already, across several studies, been able to identify which are the emotions, which are the emotional constructs like happy, excited, surprised, frustrated, but that are defined by the respondent, by the user, in their culture, in their language, and in a given context. And we can identify which are those emotions that can better explain and predict behaviors, attitudes, patterns on consumer, on customers, on citizens, throughout different aspects of consumer behavior, of consumer life. So we continue to pilot, we continue to learn, and we're in process of like productizing these things in some of our approaches. And also our job at the Global Science Organization is to learn, to teach, to understand, and to help develop new services. So we are always open to pilot new approaches, to insert these into different applications, and to see what we can learn from that. So open to any potential partnership to pilot with you guys. So with that, it's very exciting. We're moving forward with a bunch of pilots. I hope we will be able to share that in partnership with some of our business leaders at Ipsos and some of our clients in the future. And with that, before saying my thanks to all of you, I want to thank the team from the Global Science Organization, Rich Timpon, Omer Gozu, David Evaldo here, and this is me. If you have any question in the future, and if you have any question now, you are more than happy to, more than welcome to add it to the Q&A chat. So I don't think I see any question at this moment, so I'm happy to give you a couple of minutes if you guys want to add something. And if there's something that you'd rather ask me at a different time, that's also great, and happy to talk further in the future.
Well, it looks like you must have done a very thorough job, Manuel, because no one's following up with any questions. I found that really excellent. I learned a few things today. So thank you, Manuel. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please be on the lookout for a link to today's recorded presentation. That should come Friday or Monday, direct to your email box. And don't forget to download the white paper that Manuel posted into the download console. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye, Manuel.
Thank you.